everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today we venture back into the Bestiarum, but in a very different light. As many of you well know by now, the Bestiarum is a deep dive into the respective species of the Halo universe. However, when confronted with the Forerunners and their morphological, genetic and evolutionary traits, differing so dramatically across their mutated rates within their culture, I made the decision to tackle each rate of the Forerunners as their own respective species, because the differences between individual rates were just as pronounced, if not more pronounced, than the morphological differences between different species of human. In the previous episode, we took a look at the Juridicals and the Catalogue, two rates within the Forerunner ecumen that specialised on the task of legal proceedings against criminals of the ecumen, both native members of their own species and the lesser species over which the Forerunners ruled. The Juridicals, Catalogue, and to a lesser extent in their past, the Interpreters, were the Forerunners' equivalent of detective inspectors, investigators, evidence gatherers, barristers, prosecutors, judge, jury, and in some cases, executioners. But in today's episode, we're looking at two immensely elusive, mysterious, and enigmatic rates within the Forerunner ecumen. Rates with the barest of information, but based on the information available, are the Forerunner equivalent of the FBI, CIA, and to a lesser extent, the Office of Naval Intelligence. So let's dive into the specifics of the Preceptors and the Myrmidons. The Ecumen Council was the ultimate executive and judicial body of the Forerunner Empire, and it was they who set and forced civilization-spanning policies and apportioned rare resources such as slip-space travel capacity. It represented every single significant power block and rate across the ecumen, although the Council's holistic influence waxed and waned over the eons. Nevertheless, it remained the centre of Forerunner civilization. Despite its regalia, the power of the Council was never absolute, nor did it attempt to be a fully centralised authority. Entire regions of Forerunner civilization could operate autonomously if they so wished, but tensions between factions occasionally led to violence and social disruption, as the Ecumen Council never conceded to be an absolute power, and allowed far-flung regions of the ecumen to be completely autonomous and self-govern. This likely premeditated the realisation that disputes and conflicts that rose between disparate factions could very well rapidly expand and encroach upon the jurisdiction of the Ecumen Council themselves. While they rarely involved themselves personally in the affairs of the species they guarded, the Forerunners' administration could be intrusive and manipulative as the eons wore on. Their interpretations of the mantle became increasingly narrow, and punishments for transgressions against their directives more severe. So while the Ecumen Council's official standing was that absolute power wasn't on their agenda, discrete actions by the Ecumen Council ensured that these Forerunner schisms, while extraordinarily destructive, rarely involved other species and were often localized to only a few hundred planets, and only lasting a few centuries. Thus, the Ecumen Council's will and judgment was visited upon such factions by a specialist agency under their employ. As with any special investigative and intelligence agency, or indeed paramilitary organisations, there is at least some degree of governance oversight. This comes exclusively from special sessions within the Ecumen Council, whereby decisions or matters of interest are discussed by the Ecumen Council and then discreetly dealt with by the Preceptors and the Myrmidons, very much cloaked in shadow and with plausible deniability being high on the agenda. The Forerunners' expansive empire was known as the Ecumen, a civilization that dominated almost the entire galaxy with a presence on over 3 million worlds. The Forerunners' Ecumen Council was the ultimate executive and judicial body, its members representing the vast sprawl of ecumen culture. The Council set policy and adjudicated swiftly as it saw necessary, typically where there were clear violations against the mantle. But with an empire spanning over 3 million worlds, the Ecumen Council needed measures to be able to exact their will across the expanse of the Ecumen, without necessarily employing warrior servants, builder security, or other largely militaristic aspects of the Foreigner Empire, as these mobilizations tended to be very obvious, and discretion was exceedingly hard to come by given the very nature of the Ecumen Council's centres of power. The original homeworld of the Foreigners, Gibalb, was destroyed millions of years ago in an accident related to early stellar engineering efforts. Their centres of power eventually coalesced into the massive world station of Maythrillion. Maythrillion reflected Foreigner society at its most bold and arrogant, a world station of massive scale and incomprehensible complexity, surrounded by the most puissant of subtle conveniences and miracles of science. All who approached were bathed in rainbow lights of probing energy and surrounded by clouds of servitor machines, both made ready to repel threats or render immediate assistance. The station itself was the bright and welcoming second home to Forerunners, and a bejeweled fortress of absolute control to others. All knew it as the capital, and the grandeur was legendary. But with this grandeur came attention, which made dealing with sensitive matters with discretion nigh on impossible. Thus, two rates worked almost in complete secrecy as agents of the Ecumen Council, and their plausible deniability was granted via their agents' discretion, the ignorance of all other denizens of the Ecumen to the existence of these two rates, and somewhat concealed in the shadow of the impassive, unsettling visage of the Guardians. Guardians were just one of a class of powerful security custodes employed by the Foreigners known as peacemakers. Guided by artificial minds carefully designed to carry out the Council's will, Arcani and intercessors patrolled the Ecumen at large, focused on correcting disruptions that arose from internecine disputes, neglect and damage to habitability on foreigner worlds. Guardians and Preceptors were tasked with monitoring the activity of lesser species, interceding to cordon off fledgling empires and recasting their development trajectories along paths more in line with the precepts of the Mantle. Joined to the domain's expansive Overwatch network, many threats to the Ecumen were engaged and dealt with effectively well before requiring the consideration of warrior servant and builder security command. Plausible deniability was granted due to the Guardians' elusive origins. Originally, these custodes were forged as tenders and recorders of the precursor legacy, their impassive visage hovering over the affairs of their original creators ages prior to the Foreigners' rise. As this truth faded into the past, the Foreigners applied many alterations to the Guardians' template, though little could be improved upon with regard to their original design. Refashioning them as tools of planetary pacification, their frightening visage was an unnerving reminder of the things forgotten from ages past, and even attempts to change this ultimately resulted in only a repressed reflection of unspoken sins. Thus, the existence and activities of the Preceptors and the Myrmidons could be explained away by the very nature of the Guardians themselves, and their directives of policing the Ecumen under the tenets of the Mantle. Little is known about the Myrmidons, beyond the fact that they served as personal agents of the Ecumen Council. Their missions were discreet and perilous, and often took place on alien worlds and in uncharted realms, well outside the knowledge of even the Druidicals. While typically clad in distinctive black and red armour, they were the only rate outside of the Lifeworkers to have regular contact with other species. They occasionally employed biomimetic carapaces for such purposes. The Myrmidons were irrevocably Foreigner Special Forces, generally employed in guarding members of the Ecumen Council, as well as exacting their will in fringe worlds. The Myrmidons were widely believed to be a part of the Praetorians, elite-level warrior servants but under the direct employment of the Ecumen Council and were said to be of the Praetorians' righteous temper and lethal grace. The Myrmidons Special Forces received specialist equipment, weapons, resources, and likely mutations befitting of their station. There is very clear overlap between the Myrmidons and the Prefects, a class of warrior servants assigned to investigate threats to the Forerunner Ecumen. Most of their members and record archives were lost with the destruction of Myrmidon. In summary, the Preceptors and the Myrmidons served similar functions within the Forerunner caste system, but through slightly different methods. The Preceptors, as is suggested by their very names, observed, uplifted, and policed rising civilizations, teaching them the ways of the mantle of responsibility so they evolved along courses more befitting of the Ecumen Council's leadership. Under the guise of helping develop confidence and competence as autonomous practitioners of the mantle of responsibility, the Preceptors effectively exacted control, manipulation, and coercion when interfering with these nascent civilizations, willing to use the looming guardians as symbols of authority, where the Myrmidons were special agents and something of a military-orientated rate within the Forerunners' complex caste system. Where the warrior servants were the primary military caste, the Myrmidons were a specialised force that operated outside of the warrior servants' purview, as per the orders of the Ecumen Council themselves. Myrmidons were something akin to Forerunner shock troops, elite enforcers, and internal regulators, willing and able to do the jobs that the warrior servants and builder security wouldn't or couldn't do openly. By the time of the Forerunner Flood War, both the Myrmidons and the Preceptors had largely vanished or been disbanded, likely due to political reasons or moral concerns over their tactics. Their existence and methods may have conflicted with the mantle of responsibility itself, especially if they were too ruthless or too independent. The nomenclature of both rights speaks volumes to their nature. The Preceptors coming from Preceptorship, a structured program of support and guidance, ultimately being the will of the Ecumen Council in manipulating nascent civilizations to their way of thinking. And the Myrmidons, drawn from Greek mythology, invokes fierce loyalty and martial prowess, as they were the legendary soldiers of Achilles, unwavering and deadly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, kindly tap that like button, and if you're not already subscribed and want to see more stuff like this, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. Pop a comment down below telling me what you thought of today's video, or if you want me to cover something specific in the near future. I want to take this opportunity to thank and give shoutouts to my patrons and YouTube supporters: Spartan10148, my singular contender class Ancilla, the triumvirate of minds within my installation's Metarch, Falcon, Jordan, and Poseidon, my 7 installation monitors, Sophia, Ashley, Esoteric, Spartan1029, Chris, Orion, and Shane, the crush of sub-monitors, Legion, Ryan, Lebrat, Spartan0137, Element 0, J3, Cult, Evermore's, Personal Devil, Scion Esports, Phantasma, Ashton, and 191 Shaken Lightbulb, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, my most loyal of Enforcers, and every single one of the awesome people supporting the channel over on Patreon. My Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, again, Maury, Jimbo, and Balaz, and all other YouTube members keeping my installation functional on that glorious vacuum energy. I cannot thank you all enough. Shout out to John because... And if you like what I'm doing here, consider supporting the channel on one of the support links in the description to net yourself some tasty merch and help keep the channel going. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.